Commandments. They're teaching us.
Yeah.
I was going to say, what is the average velocity of an unladen swallow?
African or European?
I don't know that. 42.
Now, what is the question?
I don't know that either. Now go away, your butt. I will taunt you a second time.
Cherchez lavage.
We told them we already got one. Oh.
We'll wait a little bit to see if Eric and Aubrey come.
How
Well,
much
if they're on
Monty
time,
Python?
they still have 10 minutes.
How many Monty Python references can we make? And tie it into Star Wars.
To be fair, I don't know any of the Monty Python except for the Holy Grail.
That's a pretty darn good one to have as being your only base knowledge.
But I don't know any of the others.
There's a Life of Brian where someone born in the same town as Jesus gets mistaken for Jesus.
No, he just gets mistaken as the Messiah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which was a common.
But the
thing.
3 wise men did take their gifts back.
Yeah, they took them back.
Always look on the bright side of life.
That's the best part of the whole movie.
And do dating people's front crack Suicide Squad.
Attack! I also like the.
Why did you stab yourself? Where'd you crack Suicide Squad?
I like the debate between the teacher of the law when they have debates.
Yes, we are individuals. I'm not.
Because those are pretty fun, so.
There's a movie similar to that. I can't remember who was in it. But, he's Moses' brother-in-law. And when Moses is at the burning bush, this guy thinks God's talking to him. So, by accident, all these miracles happen around him, just purely by accident. And the way they get to the story is these people find these broken jars with manuscripts on them, and they're reading them. And I think it's Dudley Moore's in it. I
don't think I've seen that one.
It is so funny that the
Because I know who you're talking about.
a wind blows, and all that parchment just blows away. And the guy said he got the last laugh.
What was the name of that?
I cannot remember. It's Dudley Moore, I believe.
Dudley Moore, huh?
I think that was the actor.
Okay, I'm going to need a few minutes, but I can find that. Don't remember the time.
You're an avid internet movie database user.
Yes. It's just that I'm also waiting on something that will take about 30
All
seconds.
right, so we'll go ahead and get started while you do that. What are the 10 Commandments? Just a review from a month ago.
Didn't we do this already?
And a month ago, I mentioned that it's not necessarily hard, fast commandments, but teachings.
And it's not suggestions, as we made that.
It's not a
Those
suggestion.
3 things are very different things.
That's the part that's good.
So the teachings are more of a, when they mean teachings, it's to provoke thought. How am I doing this? So it's very similar to the Quaker queries. So how are you really loving God? How are you really promoting peace? How are you really living simply? So why are they important?
10 simple guidelines of the relationship with God.
And
Yes,
with
right.
everybody else.
Yes.
So if you can master these 10 things, you're going to have a decent life. Your relationships are going to work out well. Your relationship with God's going to be fulfilling.
People will trust you.
People are going to trust you. Doesn't mean you won't have problems, because there's always going to be people that don't live by these. But overall, your life will be good. And do we misunderstand the purpose?
We should.
Well, as teachings rather than commandments.
We tend to misunderstand them quite a bit because we want to make them hard, fast rules. Because rules you can find the wiggle room in. So, what is adultery?
Yeah.
How far can I go before it becomes a sin? How far can I go before, misrepresenting the quality of my product is a lie? so that's the point of all of that. So
Yes.
so we do misunderstand them. So
I'm older.
that's why it's important to revisit them. So what is the first commandment or teaching? And that's a trick question.
So, love God with all your heart.
That's Jesus's first commandment.
Ah.
Yeah. So there's debate among
You showed
religious.
us the difference
Yeah.
of what different groups think on that last week.
Yeah,
2 weeks ago.
There's debate among the various religious traditions as to what the first commandment is, and there's a reason for that, and it's actually a fairly good reason, and it deals with how we view the commandments. So is it the commandments or is it the teachings? And that determines which you see as first and what that first one means. So let's read the commandments or the teachings. This is in Exodus 20, verses 1 through
11.
Yes, 11.
17 is where it ends. It's two screens, yeah.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if you remember last time, but the colors represent the type of verb it is,
Like whether it's a commanding verb
or just a imperative, or an imperative versus a, I can't remember the other one, more of a passive voice. Indicative is what it is. So notice that the first bunch, there's no commanding verbs, imperative verbs. And in fact, there's only one commanding verb, and that's this red one, which is honor. And I find that interesting. So, and God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I am the Lord your God. The Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you should not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Is that all of them? Yep. So that's the breakdown on Wikipedia of the teaching of the Ten Commandments. So you notice that there's two that are, most of them start with
No other God.
you shall have no other gods before me. But there's two that start above that. That's the Talmud and the Catholic tradition. So the rest of them break them up differently, but evangelicals tend to break them up even more than Lutheran and some of them. We all combine them differently, which I find is interesting. So
how come thou shalt not kill is 8 in some things when it's presented? Is it a difference of importance in their mind, or is it a difference of? It's not the order it was presented.
what's that again?
Well, like I saw one of the columns, "Thou shalt not kill" is number 8 in one group.
Oh, 5, 8, 6, 7, 9, yeah.
We almost did a song there.
Put them out of order.
8, 6,
Yeah.
7, 5, 3.
I don't know if it's about importance. It's mainly just how they break them down. Like, is building an image different than worshiping another god? Or is so that's the main thing is and is adultery different than coveting your neighbor's wife? So some of them put adultery and coveting your neighbor's wife together. I think Samaria put that together. I don't remember.
That was Philo.
Philo, yeah.
The 10 suggestions.
No, not suggestions, teachings. So there's a lot of debate between what's the first commandment. Why do you think there's a debate there?
People are bored.
Because, yeah, people are bored. That's the main reason. And it really goes down to our understanding of the teaching. So it's largely due to that concept of what is commandment. Is it a law? Is it a rule? Or is it a teaching? So in Hebrew, the culture of the Hebrews, it means the first and most important thing teaching to them is that I am the Lord your God. So that's why the Talmud puts that first, because that's the first word that God spoke there. So what is the Talmud? Any of you know what that is?
I've heard it before. I know it's a set of Jewish books, but
Yeah. So the Talmud is the written or oral teaching or discussion surrounding Torah. Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of the law, or the books of the teachings. And the Talmud is it's the discussion that the rabbis have about that. So it's rabbinical teaching, and this is what Jesus is debating with the scribes and the Pharisees. When Jesus is talking to them, they're debating the Talmud, the teachings, and all of that. So they believe that Torah is divinely inspired. So all of the various branches of the Talmud will say that Torah is divine. But the Talmud is left up to human interpretation. So that's why you can have Hasidic Jews and Orthodox Jews, and Messianic Jews and Christians and various groups. They all have the scriptures the same, but their teachings are different. And it's basically it has authority, but it's basically a commentary or like denominational doctrines. So it's authoritative to certain groups, whereas the Torah is authoritative to all of them. And when we talk about, when in the New Testament, when Jesus is saying that my yoke is easy and my burden is light, he's talking about the teachings of the Talmud. So his teaching, if he were to add something to the Talmud, it would be his yoke, or his branch of that would be easy compared to the others. So all the discussion of the 613 laws and how far you can walk on the Sabbath and all of that, that's part of the Talmud. And that's why it was up for debate. And what is work? What is, how do you interpret this law? So it's important. So what's included? It includes theology, rabbinical teaching, history, customs, philosophy, ethics, legal interpretations, and folklore. So it has a great deal of information in it. And it's not just one book, it's volumes of books. In fact, that shelf probably wouldn't be big enough. It began with the Mishnah, which is the writings of the oral teachings, and they believe that started with Moses, but it wasn't written down. And then the next section of it is the Gemara, which is the commentary of the Mishnah. And then the Tanaim, which is the teaching of the various rabbis. Yes. So, also called the Tanakh, I believe. And there's actually two different Talmuds. There's the Jerusalem or the Palestinian Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud. So, two separate schools of thought, completely different schools of thought. So we get this idea that all the Jewish people were one cohesive group. They weren't. There were the Samaritans and there were the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They all had their different teachings. And that's what the list of the 10 Commandments also showed. There's different teachings, even of the commands or the teachings of God. So the Jerusalem Talmud was largely used in Palestine. So just the Holy Land. And I call it Palestine because that's what the Romans called it during that time, and the Talmud was constructed during that period. So and it largely focused on what was going on in the Holy Land. It gives detailed accounts on agricultural law, which is interesting. Why agricultural law? Because it was dealing with the inheritance of the people of Israel. And it's considered not as organized and incomplete. And the The teachings in it are considered to be more factually based and logical, which is interesting. All this is just fun little tidbits. The Babylonian Talmud began during the exile. So this is what Ezra would have been teaching from, because this is where rabbinical Judaism actually comes from, as the Babylonian Talmud. So it's considered the more academic version because it was structured better. But the scholars consider it more rambling. So they have a lot of words. And it relies on anecdotes, and it bases its arguments on syllogisms and inductions instead of deductions. So one of the examples that scholars will give: all dogs are animals, all animals have 4 legs, therefore dogs have 4 legs. So it's not necessarily logical, it's just they make references like that.
Do we need to get into discussions about iodine powder and stuff like that?
You probably could. That's what they would probably do. They're both written in Aramaic, but one was written in the Palestinian dialect and the other's Babylonian dialect. And this is the most interesting thing. They weren't finished or codified, put into book form, until the 7th century AD. So they were still building the Talmud during Jesus' ministry, during the early portions of the church. The Christian Bible was basically determined before the Jewish Bible was. So, and the Jewish teachings. So a lot of the theology of the church and a lot of the theology based on Jewish rabbinical teaching, they were coming together at the same time. So why do I mention that? Because they're both evolving at the same time. Some of the things found in the Talmud made their way into early Christian teaching. And some of the Jewish teaching found in the Talmud are arguments against both the teachings of Jesus and the early church. And Jesus is mentioned in the Talmud multiple times, but usually in a negative light, and usually the time frame that they put him in doesn't match church history, so that we can't really use it as a proof text for Christian dating, or Jewish dating for that matter. So, but what it does say is that Jesus was hung on the eve of Passover, so they confirmed that, and that he had disciples. Although the Talmud says he had 5 disciples, not 12. And the names are different too, except for Matthew. They have Matthew in there, but Matthew was a tax collector, so they probably would mention him because he was a bad Jew anyway. And they call Jesus a sorcerer, lustful, and an idolater, and they call his mother an adulterer.
I thought the Christian tradition held he was arrested on Passover, but not actually hung on Passover.
He was arrested before, so Passover started at sundown on Friday night. So he is arrested the evening before. And
I thought the Last Supper was a Passover.
he was celebrating it, early. So, but it wasn't, the actual Passover begins on the Sabbath. So that's where the confusion comes from. So all of these references or references to Jesus can be found in both the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud. So that brings us back to what is the first commandment. That's why the Talmud's important. And that's why the Catholic teaching has the first commandment, including that first phrase, I am the Lord your God, is because they were emerging at the same time. So, I am the Lord your God. This is the first and second commandment, according to the Talmud or the Catholic teaching. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other God before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting iniquity of the father on the children to the third and fourth generation for those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to the thousands of those that love me and keep my commandments. So what is the teaching here?
That God is holy. I'm not sure if I like the word jealous.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure that fits in there. But it's also a warning about your children, your grandchildren, and great-grandchildren.
Yeah.
And to me, that would be so worrisome to have your children unbelievers, knowing that they could be cursed up to the fourth generation.
Yeah, what you do is important and has a lasting effect. So it begins with, I brought you out of Egypt. When we read Genesis and Exodus, what do we see? How do you interpret yourself, Genesis and Exodus? Do you see it as history, a story?
I know the History Channel sees it as history. They did a special on it, basically saying that everything that the Bible claims to have happened in the order that the Bible claims to have said it happened. And then it talks about how the smoke by day, fire by night thing, the History Channel thought that they were following a volcano.
Could have.
That happened to be active at that time frame.
Yeah. Yeah, they have some pretty good theories as to how everything happened. So in those first two books, we see the creation, the fall, the flood, the dispersion of people, the calling of Abraham, and Israel's early history. But how are those presented? Is it presented like we read a textbook?
It's almost like a diary.
Yeah, it's presented as a story or an epic poem and mythology.
To explain the origin of who they are to the next generation.
Yeah. It's written in a way that it's easy to explain and to pass on. And it's in a story form because it gets the attention of the younger generation. So
Also gives them meaning.
yeah.
Purpose.
we don't like using the term mythology regarding scripture, because we have this idea that that's fake. But mythology is a genre of folklore consisting primarily of narratives that play a fundamental role in a society. The word myth comes from the Greek meaning speech, conversation, narrative, or story, and it does not distinguish if it's fact or fiction. It just means that it's meaningful. And it gives us it explains something important. So Genesis and Exodus, they're mythology because they're a story. And mythology can have spiritual relevance, as these stories convey the core teaching of their cultural origin and their development as a people. So, do we still have mythology?
We might not use that term to apply to it, but there's definitely modern mythology.
So, how many of us have heard the story of Paul Revere?
It's been a while, but yes.
It's mythology. Yes, Paul Revere was a real person. Yes, he did ride. He was not the only person that rode.
Nope.
And he wasn't the most important person that rode. He just had the most memorable name. So
He wasn't even the most successful of them.
we developed
a publicist.
we developed a mythology around this one person. It doesn't detract from the truth. It's just not the whole truth.
It wasn't until Obi was in like 3rd grade that I knew there was a 14-year-old girl who did the exact same thing.
Mhm.
What? Are you kidding
And she
me?
was actually more
effective.
important
Right.
Yeah,
than
she
Paul
was more
Revere.
effective than he was.
That's offensive.
Where she rode was actually where they needed to be. So, so it's that's why we need to understand that it is mythology, because that's important. There's aspects of the story that may or may not be true.
Paul Bunyan, John Henry, Johnny Appleseed.
Those,
I was laughing because Jared was talking about the Bible, and then you said, "Yeah, like Paul Bunyan." That's
so
Well, we were talking about
I
mythology.
know.
So
It just sounded funny to us.
so the difference between Paul Bunyan and regular mythology is that's folklore.
true.
So
and you're
that's
not taught it as truth.
yeah.
So when you're taught these things as truth, whether you're
Yeah.
modern day Americans or ancient Israelites, and you find out those things might not have actually been true,
Yeah.
that can be kind of difficult. Whereas they might not have been taught it as explicit
Yeah.
actual truth, but we were. And then you grow up and find out a lot of this is not historically based, and it kind of rocks your world a little bit because you go, well, what else is not explicitly true in this book?
Johnny Appleseed's a good example of mythology because there was somebody like him. His name wasn't Johnny,
John Chapman.
but there is elements of truth to that, where Paul
Appleseed
Bunyan
was his
is
name, obviously,
just
it was in the legend, it was just what his nickname was.
just a story that's made up. So, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. When we're looking at the 10 Commandments, the first thing God is telling them is that I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt. I brought you out of slavery. Why is that important? Why does he remind them of this before everything else?
Why is there a reason of giving him many thanks of anything? Oh, right.
He's establishing his credibility.
Yeah.
He's saying, if you don't remember this, everything else I'm going to teach you has no meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything rides on this. I'm the Lord your God. I brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. How did God accomplish that? we think of it as being very slow. 10 plagues. He could have just done it immediately. But he did it in stages. Why would he do it that way?
Give them a chance to say, you know something, you win. We're going to follow you. Would be my initial reaction on the thought process on that.
So there's 10 plagues. The first is turning the blood or the Nile into blood. The second is frogs, then gnats and lice, then flies, disease to animals and livestock, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and the death of the firstborn. Each of those are connected to an Egyptian god. So what these plagues are showing is God is systematically defeating Egypt. And the last of the plagues was darkness and the death of the firstborn. So the sun is Ra in the Egyptian pantheon, and has always been one of the top gods of the Egyptian pantheon. And Pharaoh was a son of Ra. So what he's doing at that last plague is not only is he defeating Ra, he's cutting Ra's connection to humanity off, because he stopped that dynastic line. So all of this being brought up out of Egypt, what he's reminding them of is, I control the world. I have the power. All this stuff about Egypt doesn't hold anything to me. And Egypt was the superpower. So it's saying that the first teaching of God to Israel is that Yahweh, or I am, is the Most High God. Ra doesn't stand up to him. You know, all the minor gods in the Egyptian pantheon, he can easily take care of them. So Egypt has no power. Egypt was the ruler of the world at that time. And rightfully so. I mean, the pyramids are amazing. I haven't seen them, but they're amazing. John knows that a little more than I do. They're spectacular.
I've only seen them in videos and in VR, but I've not. But
And Egypt had that power a long time.
Mhm.
Well, when you see a carved rock with a figure taller than this church, that is awesome.
Yeah,
And some as big as this church.
yeah.
So yes, they have the technology, but what good did it do them in the end?
Yeah. So they had the technology, they had the military. At the time of Egypt, they had the tanks of their day. The chariot was the height of technology.
Those have been found.
Yeah. So they were the ones that started the Bronze Age. They were the first of the great superpowers. They weren't necessarily the first of the empires, but they were the first of the great powers. So the pyramids were built. So Cleopatra, one of the last of all the rulers of ancient Egypt, was as far away from the pyramids as she was to us. That's how long their power was there.
You know, Chad, when you think about the power raised through Egypt, God said, I raised up Pharaoh. He did the same thing with Babylonia. It was also a very powerful country, yet he brings them down.
Yeah. In much the same way.
Yeah.
And that's something that you see throughout Scripture. The story continues to cycle through. So there was no nation greater than Egypt, and their gods were seen as the right gods because they gave the people power. So do you see some parallels between everything of human history here? Whoever has the power, the worldly standard is might has right. It's okay to invade Africa as European colonizers because we have the power to. And since we have the power, it's okay. So the first teaching that God gives to Israel and to us is God is greater than the powers of this world. And he cares for his people and will redeem them from injustice and bondage brought about by the world's powers. So that's why the Talmud and the Catholics included that in the first commandment, because that is the first teaching. I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of Egypt. I defeated the world's powers for you. And I brought you out of the land of bondage. If that's the first commandment, why don't most traditions include it as the first teaching? Seems pretty important, right? I mean, I made a pretty strong case, I hope.
Do they think of it as the title and author?
They go about it in every Seder meal every year, so they go over this stuff.
Yeah, they do. In the Talmud, it's very much the beginning point.
Like, why don't we call it one of the 10 Commandments or 11?
Yeah, the 11 might.
God's not telling us like, thou shalt not do something. Like, it's more of saying, I am the Lord your God.
It's this thought process of, is God rules-based or is God relational?
Does it start out with I am?
I am the Lord your God.
I mean, it makes sense to me not to include it.
If we're looking at it from a legalistic point of view. Because then, if I'm going to make myself look good, I can check mark I don't have any other gods. I don't have any idols. I haven't killed anybody. I'm good. But is that the most important teaching? Why would it be important to recognize this as the first of the teachings?
Well, it's like we were just kind of hinting at. God is relational, and he's not a judge. He's a father.
And he cares for us. I brought you out of this place of injustice and put you in your own spot. I made a nation out of you, a people out of you, and I am your God. So it kind of goes back to this mythology or the story of origins. God defeated the world's power. He defeated the world's gods, and he became the Most High God. So
the wording.
Yeah.
It wasn't beforehand.
So if we do not acknowledge Yahweh as being over all the powers of the earth first, this allows us to put other powers in front of Yahweh. It allows that question. Could there be a God stronger than Yahweh? So basically, everything after this is based on our abilities to prove to ourselves that God is powerful.
Are we going to get into a discussion about how Buddhism looks at Christianity and Judaism and such?
No.
Okay.
Not right now, anyway. So.
You had your chance to ask questions. You were supposed to do that before today, right?
True.
Yep. Before I start typing this week's PowerPoint, you had 8 hours prior to this. So this also proves to the people of Israel, and us by extension, that the wisdom of God, His teaching, and His law supersedes everything else of this world. So if God didn't defeat Egypt and bring them out of that land of bondage, would He be God? Because the powers of the world would have been stronger. So it leaves, there's a lot of teaching there that we miss if we skip that. In my opinion, it definitely should be included as part of the first commandment. Because if we don't accept that first, then everything else kind of loses its significance. Because what we traditionally call the first commandment, you shall have no other God before me, it makes it sound as if God's begging. Please worship me. I'm cool. Instead of I am.
You're forgetting what I've done for you, Lilith.
You know, so
When did he establish his name as I am?
in Exodus,
When he was talking with
when
the
he was
first
talking
bush.
at the burning bush,
Okay, is that just
I am
before
that I am.
the Ten Commandments?
Mhm.
Okay.
is when after Moses left Egypt and went into the desert and he saw the burning bush, that's when he told Moses his name. Prior to this, he is always referred to as El, which in Canaanite religion is the god of Baal, or the father of Baal.
The reason I asked was that first phrase, I am the Lord your God. I was thinking of as I am being a name.
Mhm.
I am, comma, the Lord your God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's how it is presented, or should be presented. I am Yahweh, the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt. So traditionally, evangelicals see verse 3 as the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. Because that's the first of the thou shalt nots. Why do you think the Talmud includes it? Includes that first part with it.
The stuff we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm. So if we don't have that verse 2, it does sound like he's begging. And that's a lot of the religions of the world, the pantheons. If they don't have followers, they lose their power. And that's the Greek gods required people to worship them so that they held power according to their mythology. And once they stopped worshiping them, then they lost everything.
I think using the word commandment instead of teaching kind of takes away that begging feel of it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if we see it as teachings, yeah, I could see it as sounding like begging.
Mm-hmm. And then if we think of it as commandment, where it's a hard, fast rule, it makes God vindictive almost. Which brings into that visiting, I'm a jealous God, visiting to the third, fourth generation, those that don't do my commandments, but to the 10,000s for those that love me. So it's understandable that we have this debate. So this is something that I found interesting from the New Interpreter's Bible commentary about this verse. We may identify 4 related themes. First, the command requires Israel to mobilize all of its life in every sphere around one single loyalty. In the contemporary world, as in the ancient world, we practice a kind of henotheism, which lets different gods have their play in different spheres. This command insists on the integrity, coherence, and unity of all of life. Israel is a community destined to will one thing. And that's the first thought that he has there. The second thought, it's not likely that this command makes any claim about monotheism in a formal sense. That is, it does not insist that there are no other gods. It insists only that other gods must receive none of Israel's loyalty or allegiance. This command, thus, is in keeping with Deuteronomy 6, which also allows for the existence of other gods, but denies them airtime. That probably makes us a little uncomfortable too, right?
It's an English word, it's what does it mean to you? What's a little god? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
The last phrase, before me, may also be read before my face, because face in reference to God means sanctuary or altar. The command may mean in my presence, in my shrine. On this reading, the commandment pertains precisely to the practice of worship and asserts that the liturgic life of Israel must be under stringent discipline in order to avoid compromise. That also, I can see that. This one I think is the most interesting. Fourth, H. Graf Reverend Lowe has offered an alternative reading of this commandment that has considerable merit. He observes that the formation of this commandment is not "thou shalt not," but rather "there will not be" to you. He proposes that this statement is not an imperative commandment, or the commanding verb, but an indicative, whereby Yahweh, in light of the Exodus, declares the banishment of all other gods. On this reading, the statement is a declaration of theological emancipation, whereby Israel can freely and gladly serve Yahweh without any distracting compromise. One does not need to obey this commandment, but only to hear and trust the good news of triumph and banishment. You ever thought of it in that way?
I'm not sure I understand the last line.
Well, I never recognized the 10 plagues as being killing the Egyptian pantheon.
Yeah. But it does change a lot of how we think about things, doesn't it? So what he's meaning there is that the good news is that you don't have to worry about all the other gods. They don't have any power. They can't hold anything over you. They don't deserve any of your praise. I'm the only one that you need. That's the emancipation. You're not being held in bondage by the gods of this world. As Paul would describe them, the principalities and the powers. So, the evil forces that influence the world.
You know, Jerry, that all makes a lot of sense as far as the gods. Because when I thought about it, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. That made me think, maybe Pharaoh thought, okay, you got rid of that God, but I got another one. And kept relying on these gods
Yeah.
to save them.
Oh, I just
Never
had a
thought of it
thought.
that way.
Yeah.
So basically, Moses and Pharaoh were playing Pokemon.
Yeah. I mean, that's an excellent
Right,
way
you.
of looking at it. But Moses only had one
Ra
ball,
fainted.
and that's all he needed. You know? And Pharaoh had all these cards.
No, that's Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah.
That's true.
So,
And that one's actually supposed to be Egyptian.
Oh man.
But yes, just using the one Pokemon to defeat all the other
Yeah.
Pokemon.
yeah. I mean, he just...
He gets a free shot in the first time that they get out, and they all faint after one hit, right?
You're saying God is you too.
So, this fourth interpretation, I think, is the most interesting out of all those. All the others we probably heard before. You know, no God before me. You should only worship Him. You know, all the rest we think about constantly because we think of them as commandments instead of teachings. So this fourth one connects to that statement of out of the house of slavery. I've emancipated you. You're no longer in bondage. No other power is held over you. So we're free from the bondage of the powers of this world. And we're free to worship the one true God. And in the same breath, we're free not to.
But why wouldn't you if he actually exists?
So he does give them the right to not worship him. He warns them that it's probably not going to be a very good idea, but you don't have to believe in me. But just know that everything else that you're going to believe holds no power. Because I'm the one that brought you out of Egypt. So there will not be to you any other God, only Yahweh. It's kind of I like the way that sounds. Does that change our understanding of who God is and the teachings of God? Is he demanding or inviting? He shows his dominion over the powers of this world, and he redeems us from Egypt, the house of injustice and slavery, and Egypt's the holder of the world's powers. And there will not be to you any other gods, only Yahweh. So everything that you're worried about in this world, God has them in his hand. So how should we view our contemporary Egypts? Who are our contemporary Egypts? In the 1950s, there was Soviet Union and the United States, or NATO. They held power over the entire world. It tells us that they don't have as much power as we think they have. And that we shouldn't trust in them because that can all fall away. And it wouldn't take much. One day. Really. What's it tell us about how should we view those of other faiths in relation to that command? How should we view Islam?
That is a tough one. I know there's so much debate. Is it Yahweh or is it actually Middle Eastern God?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't Yahweh a Middle Eastern God?
I'm sorry?
Isn't Yahweh a Middle Eastern God?
Yeah, he is.
And they claim to be, oh my gosh, who's Abraham's son that God?
Yeah, Ishmael.
Ishmael. They claim to be descendants of Ishmael, direct descendants of Abraham, but they're also referred to as Arabs.
Mm-hmm.
I know they base so much on Judaism and Christianity for their Bible.
Mm-hmm.
They recognize Jesus as a great prophet.
Mm-hmm.
They recognize Mary as his mother. She holds a certain esteem. And so many of their laws are based on ours.
Mm-hmm.
They think that it was Ishmael rather than Jacob that was taken up to sacrifice. They also believe that Abraham took Ishmael when they found that black stone or rock or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So
They also have it reversed on who was the wife and who was the slave.
yeah,
And there's
it's
So how do they view the world? They view it as law and rules. How do the Jewish people view the world? Some of them view it as law and rules. Others also view it differently. How do Christians view it? Some of them view it as laws and rules, and some of them view it as a relationship. So, are these other faiths wrong? Or are they just in bondage?
I think most Christians would say, except for the Jews, that Muslims, Buddhists, they're wrong.
Yeah. Why are they wrong?
They don't accept God as I am.
They're held in bondage to the powers of this world.
That is a dangerous idea, though, because throughout Christianity's history, we've often violently tried to free these people from bondage by bringing our religion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sounds like they were in bondage.
Are we right in doing that? Or are we just as bad as everybody else? Were we following God? Or were we following the powers of this world.
Well, I know in early centuries there's that people converted at the end of a sword.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a really true conversion.
No, it really isn't. That's why Quakers don't do a lot of proselytizing. Is because if I make a fancy, if I debate really well, are you following God or are you following me?
Seems like we did a lot of proselytizing.
I was thinking the missionary work. That
Like
we talked about.
evangelical do for sure, but I mean, and then it started out with proselytizing too. I mean, maybe somewhere in the middle, when they got into like quietism, they're like, well, we shouldn't do anything, just sit here, wait for God to do something. But like, it seems like there's quite a bit of proselytizing in Quaker faith.
They will speak the truth.
Proselytizing. Or what's proselytize mean? I mean, does it mean arguing, or does it mean like sharing what you believe is right?
Trying to get other people
It is
to
the
Bringing the day of the Lord
the purposeful attempt at convincing you or making you change your mind and turn, converting, yeah. So,
or freeing them from bondage.
Convert or attempt to convert someone from one religion, belief, or opinion to another.
Thank you.
So the proselytizing is more of a human endeavor, where most early friends, it looks like proselytizing because they'll speak, but
They weren't like seeking to win souls for the Quaker Church. I think to me is the difference. Like they weren't out there trying to get.
Well, I mean,
people
they
to
sure
sign
were.
up. They just believed they had the truth and they wanted to share it.
I don't know. Like, it seems like they were excited though when like, oh, they became a Quaker. At least in George Fox's journal. So you're gonna tell me that he wasn't hoping that that would happen by his sharing of the truth, which to me is kind of like.
That's different. That's different.
You can hope a lot of things.
To try to win people to Quakerism.
What was he trying to do then? He was trying to win people away from the bad stuff, right? But away from it to where? To nothing?
I don't think he was necessarily trying to create his own.
Remember when we first talked about how he first started off as being nearly suicidal at one point because he was depressed about how these religions were presenting themselves as pillars of morality and goodness and all that, and he kept seeing the people that were in the same breath pretending to be that. They were pretending to be that as far as he could tell.
And he did say repent, but it's left up to you have to answer the call within yourself.
Like, you know, by your own lessons, this is not true. Look at what you're doing and look at what you're teaching and what you're doing, and it's and by your own laws, you're not telling the truth.
Bad choices.
Yeah,
So
it
he
was
was excited
worse.
when people acknowledge that. Oh, you're right. That is not great.
Yeah.
By the way, let me get on my black horse and teleport.
Yeah, let me teleport to.
I think he was.
You're most likely familiar with the 10 Commandments of the Bible.
Sorry.
Don't murder, steal, honor your parents.
Like I was thinking, George Fox just didn't like the Christian establishment. He just considered himself a Christian and wanted to show people that the establishment is not doing what Christianity is supposed to be about.
Yeah, but I mean, it very quickly
Look
turned
at what
into.
it's supposedly teaching and what they're actually doing, and you can see there's a disconnect.
So I don't think he was trying to
disconnect there.
Maybe not at first, but I mean, eventually, like pretty quickly, it turned into, well, now these people are kind of following in my footsteps and stuff. But I don't know. I don't think now proselytizing. Like when I proselytize, I'm not trying to convert a Muslim. All I would do is, tell a Muslim that they're God's child, for example. Because that's what I believe. I believe we're all in Christ, and that we're all God's children, and that we've basically. And so, like to me, it's not even if they don't convert from Islam to Christianity. To me, that doesn't matter. But
But see, that's what I'm saying. The goal of proselytizing is different than what you're saying.
Yeah.
That means you're actually looking for people to say, oh, you know what, you're right, I'm gonna sign up for your clubhouse and stuff.
So, what I'm getting at is these other faiths, the commandments don't necessarily say that there are no other gods or spiritual beings that have power in this world. It's saying that they don't have more power than God, and that you don't have to worry about them because God's over them all. And in the end, he will defeat them all just like he did Egypt. So, go ahead.
With the new interpretation in my mind of defeating the Egyptian gods before he brought them out of Egypt, if he hadn't done that, maybe they would have been terrified that the Egyptian gods are now going to stop them or kill them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Entirely possible.
And they still were terrified of that.
They were still definitely afraid of those chariots that they saw coming at them.
But God defeated them.
Mm-hmm.
They walked out of Egypt carrying Egyptian wealth.
Weren't they starting to worship those gods again right before Moses came down with the Ten Commandments?
Specifically the calf, but yeah.
So it kind of makes sense for him to remind them about that as well.
And that's why constantly throughout Scripture, remember, I am the God that brought you out of Egypt. Remember the Passover. Remember this, remember this, remember this. And that's what the teachings are about. Is it's easy to get trapped and back into bondage. It's hard to live free. So, and this is what the video that I'm about to share is dealing with. So it's also from the Bible Project, but there wasn't the Sermon on the Mount and the Ten Commandments is kind of what I'm trying to connect here. There really isn't a specific teaching in the Sermon on the Mount that directly pertains to this. It's just kind of overarching that the command is to love God and love others. So this is what the Bible Project put out for.
You're most likely familiar with the Ten Commandments in the Bible, stuff we generally take as good advice. Don't murder, don't steal, honor your...
The list goes on. And those are just the first 10. There are actually a total of 613 commands, all given to ancient Israel, found in the first 5 books of the Bible, which in Hebrew are called the Torah.
Now the word Torah is usually translated in English as the law, because it has all of these laws in it. And as you read through them, you wonder, am I supposed to obey some of these, all of these? I mean, what's the purpose of the law?
Well, that translation is kind of confusing, because while the Torah has laws in it, the book itself is fundamentally a story about how God is creating new kinds of people who are fully able to love God and love others. And when Jesus taught about the Torah, he said that he was bringing that story to its fulfillment.
So, walk me through the story and how it's fulfilled.
So the story begins with God creating humanity who rebels. And God chooses Abraham to bless all of the nations through his family, who end up in slavery down in Egypt, and so God rescues them. Then at Mount Sinai, God makes a covenant with Israel, like an agreement. And all of the laws that Moses gives to Israel are the terms of that agreement. They're like a constitution. And so some of the laws are about rituals and customs that set Israel apart from the nations. Other laws are about social justice or morality. And by following these, Israel would show the other nations what God is like.
Okay, so the rest of the Torah is just a complete list of laws that Moses gives Israel?
No, the rest of the Torah just continues the story. And the 613 commands are only a selection from that original constitution. And even these have been broken up and placed at strategic points within the story. Now pay attention, because you'll see a really clear pattern. Moses gives the first laws to Israel.
Don't worship other gods, don't make idols.
And then right after that, there's a story of Israel breaking those very laws.
Yeah, they worship the golden calf.
And so Moses gives some more laws, and then you get more stories of rebellion. Some more laws, rebellion again, some more laws, more rebellion, and you start to see the point.
Right, no matter how many laws, they're just going to continue to rebel.
So at the conclusion of the Torah's story, Moses gives this final speech to Israel as they prepare to go into their new home. And he tells them, you guys, I know that you're not going to follow all of God's laws. You've proven to me that you're incapable. And Moses says the problem is that their hearts are hard and that they're going to need new, transformed hearts if they're ever going to truly follow God's law. And he was right. I mean, the story goes on to recount Israel's total failure.
They go into the land, they break all the laws.
Right. Now, the next section of books in the Jewish tradition are the 15 books of the prophets, and they reflect back on the story. For example, Ezekiel, he said that if Israel was ever going to obey the law, God's Spirit would have to transform their hard hearts into soft hearts. And Jeremiah said that's when obedience to God's command wouldn't feel like a duty, but they would be written deep in their hearts. And Isaiah, he promised a future leader, Israel's Messiah, who will lead all of the people in obedience to the law. Now, in Jewish tradition, all of these books together are called the prophets, even the historical books, because they're continuing the story told from the perspective of the prophets.
Okay, so we have the law and the prophets, and they're telling one connected story about God's desire to bless the whole world through a people, Israel, who it turns out needs a new heart.
Yes, and Jesus saw himself as continuing that story. So he agreed with the law and the prophets when he taught that it's out of the human heart that come the most ugly parts of human nature. It's like the default setting of our hearts as opposed to God's law. But Jesus also said that he came to solve that problem, and in his words, to fulfill the law.
So what does he mean there, to fulfill the law?
Well, first he said that the demand of all of the laws in the Torah could be fulfilled by what he called the Great Commandment, that we are to love God and to love others.
So that seems pretty easy. I mean, we all want to love.
Well, we think we want to love. But Jesus showed how love is far more demanding than we realize. So he quotes the law, do not murder. And he says, yes, not killing someone is a very loving thing to do. But then he also says that when you treat someone with disrespect or when you nurse resentment against them, you're also violating God's moral ideal because you're not treating that person with love. And so Jesus said true love ought to extend even to our own enemies. So even though this command seems very simple, Jesus showed how our hearts are not currently equipped to fulfill even this basic command of God to love others.
And that's kind of a downer.
But where Israel failed, Jesus brought the story to its fulfillment. As Israel's Messiah, he fully loved God and others, and he showed all of the nations what God is truly like. He did this through his acts of compassion and mercy, and ultimately by loving his enemies even unto death. And after his resurrection, he told his followers that he would send God's Spirit to transform their hearts so that they could follow him and fulfill the purpose of the law, to love God and to love their neighbor. So this fulfills the story of the law and the prophets, or in the words of the Apostle Paul, the one who loves fulfills the law.
I like the plus 12 minor prophets.
So any questions or comments?
About the other gods, do you remember when that Jewish cantor came to talk? And I know you three weren't there, of course, but I can't remember the question was asked, and he told a story about Abraham. Abraham's father, and they're saying this is, they don't know if it's a true story, made gods. And so Abraham's father loved to shop.
Oh, this story.
And when he came back, all the gods were smashed to pieces. And his father said, what happened? He says, the one God remained and destroyed all of them. He said, it's only a piece of wood. How could it do that? And, you know, that was such a good story.
Whether that was true or not, that's...
Yeah.
And that's something that's in the Talmud.
Yeah. Oh, it is in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely in there. And we don't know for sure.
Yeah.
But from where Abraham came from, it was one of the early empires, one of the early major cities of Mesopotamia. So and they did have a pantheon of gods. And the highest of their pantheon was El. And after Babylon, or Tower of Babel, according to their religion of that area, El was no longer, you couldn't talk to El directly, which kind of plays into that he split the nation, or put the people out to the nations, and he chose Israel as his inheritance. Israel was the only one that he spoke to from then on. Everybody else couldn't speak directly to God. So it's interesting when you look at it from the wider picture of human history, because it does show how he split them up so that he could teach this one group the truth, and then he comes and he tries to bring them all back in. And that's showing what he said in the first teaching, I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of Egypt, defeating their gods, and I brought you out of slavery.
And I also find it interesting that every culture knows there is something greater than them. You know, what they call it, lightning, clouds.
Yeah.
They know there is a type of God ruling.
Don't feel like you have to leave right now. I just have to wake up early tomorrow.
Okay, go ahead.
See you, Jason.
So, anyway, I just found that aspect interesting. And I think it's important to recognize as we approach the rest of the commandments or the teachings and approach what Jesus was teaching with the Sermon on the Mount. Because Jesus' teaching, as the video showed, he goes more than just you shouldn't kill somebody, but you should protect their dignity as well and treat them with respect, because they are also loved by God, brought out of the land of Egypt, out of that bondage, and he is their God. So, anyway, anything else? Must have deleted. Next week is Holy Silence, and then in 2 weeks is Who Are Quakers?
It's just an artistic way to say it. Going
Yep.
forward.
Going forward. So, and then 3 weeks from now is chapter 9. So.